In the background, Peter could hear Jen's contemporary Christian music playing. Jen had modern church parents who allowed her to listen to that kind of thing. When it wasn't teenage girl love songs to Jesus, it was something equally stupid, Peter thought. He hated all of it. It was all so earnest, and it was all stolen. The keyboard sounds, the beats, the chord progressions, the vocal tricks, the outfits, the riffs, the names, the album art, the hair, everything.
Remember, praise his name till you go insane. You get him on your brain, you never feel the same. Cause he rocks and rules, he's nobody's fool. He's the only cool to get OT school. Back there in Galilee, his hood was there, you see. He died for you and me, but my only plea, his name was Jesus Christ. And you should read his life and be a faithful wife who watches everything. Whose house?
Sing what?
God's house. Whose house?
Sing what?
God's house. Praise
In
him.
his house.
Praise
In
him.
his house.
Praise
In
him.
his house.
Praise him.
The enemy uses diversity. We remove it. The enemy needs his creatures to pour themselves out as an offering to him, to throw themselves without reservation into reality itself, holding nothing back. We convince them to bottle themselves up inside themselves, letting nothing of themselves out whatsoever. He requires them to commit. We foster an inability to fully commit themselves in any way to anything. He puts the spark of excellence into them. He lights inspiration deep within them. We teach them to shamefully, dutifully bury all that in a hole in the ground for him.
Television shows often made Peter feel a drunken rushing of his blood. An invigorating, refreshing wind swept him away from his gray life to somewhere all done up in bright neon colors with exciting drum beats and the sounds of fanfares from plastic keytar trumpets. The stories were magic, and they made living in the world seem downright worth doing. But Peter wasn't supposed to live in the world. It was bad, and so was magic.
Also, the child slowly becomes aware that he is dreaming, and as the terror he is feeling at approaching the church at night grows, he resolves to try to wake himself. He tries to thrash around in the bed, but this only makes his dream avatar thrash around a bit, while still wending its way closer and closer to the church building with him trapped inside. It is hilarious. He is along for this ride, and he can't turn his head or close the eyes of his dreaming self, but he can twitch a bit as he walks inexorably forward. Such a treat to witness. They round the corner and see the church. It is lit up like there's a service going on. He doesn't want to go in, but they do go in. They open the door, start up the familiar carpeted stairs, and stop dead. The room is full of things which are having their own dark service. He sees their pretty faces as they turn to stare. The flesh of their faces and hands, if it can be called that, has melted partly off them like dark, moldering candle wax. Their eyes glint metallic and red deep in their musty sockets. Their teeth gnash at him in confusion. The room is full of them, and when he stops at the top of the stairs, every single dead thing that moves, clearly interrupted in its long accustomed worship activities, stops, sitting and staring directly at him. He realizes if he wants to fit in, he has to be dead and rotting inside too. Otherwise, they will eat him. It is what they are gathered together to do, to devour life and make everything dead.
The story is told of old Mr. McDowell meeting a young brother who'd been reading the Word of God one Lord's Day. "What have you been enjoying in God's Word, Mr. McDowell?" asked the young man. Mr. McDowell was, as those who had the privilege to meet him may remember, very fond of being an encouragement to young people. "I just found something new in Romans," the young man said. He'd not long been a child of God. "Well," Mr. McDowell told him, "if it's new, it isn't true, and if it's true, it isn't new." Surely this should be an exercise for all of us. There is much that is new coming in among us, and we need to fight to hold fast to those old landmarks, lest we end up, every one of us, racked upon the dark rocks that threaten us. And so much more as we see the day approaching.
Mr. Dick knows that the child is instantly unsettled by the quick little snakes he sometimes encounters when walking barefoot in the hayfield. Mr. Dick has caught a snake, skinny and black with a yellow stripe running the length of its body. It struggles feebly, but can't escape the tight grip on its throat as he holds it ready behind his back. This should be good. The child comes up to see what is funny, and Mr. Dick sticks the frightened snake in the child's petrified face. The child is paralyzed with fear at first, then runs once his muscles start to unlock themselves from their deadly grip on each other. Mr. Dick bends over with laughter and releases the snake, which flees like a fork of lightning wrapped in black and yellow, the creature every bit as frightened as the child. The child doesn't feel traumatized, but he thinks some more.
Peter's grandfather sometimes said words like damn and hell and piss. Peter's father did not so indulge. Normally, Peter's father said fake swear words instead, the whole time, whenever he was working. "Lovely Ginger," he would say in amazement. "Son of a face," he would shout in a high, anguished voice when he blackened his thumbnail with a hammer. "Puke! This thing is as useless as you-know-what's on a bull, and it looks like heck," he would declare to another man. "Heck! This is as useless as tits on a salmon loaf, and it looks like puke," he would say, when he didn't think anyone was listening. "For crying out loud, what the Sam Hill are you doing?" he would demand of Peter. "Oh, my soul," he would moan. "Oh, my stars," he would gasp. "Wait just one cotton-pickin' minute," he would call after Peter. "What in the name of heck are you doing, for Pete's sake?" He didn't mean St. Peter. That would have been irreverent. "For the love of Mike," he'd say. Ditto, Michael, the archangel. Instead of mistake, he said boner. This always made Peter snicker. "Oh, look, I made a real boner here. I forgot to tighten this nut." He used to call people dingleberries until Peter told him what those were. This made Peter's father angry, because now he had to stop saying the word entirely. He also angrily shot down Peter's suggestion that perhaps cotton pickin' wasn't terribly appropriate for use if there were black folks around. When he got really mad, sometimes Peter's father would very quietly mutter truly obscene things like "prick, damn, fart" to himself. People would often ask Mr. Shovel questions like, "Why can't Christians go to movies?" or "Why can't Christians dance?" Mr. Shovel always said something like, how could I, the very children of God, go into such a place as that and take our entertainment and feel comfortable there, in the very sinful world itself, the world that crucified in the dark, sad world that crucified your precious Savior, the blessed, perfect, sinless Son of God. How could we do that? I could not do that. Could you do that? Surely we could not do that. Could you do that and feel right before the Lord who shed his precious blood for us? I think not. I think not. Mr. Shovel answered all questions with rhetorical questions and a great number of italics. His high, carrying voice would go up and down and pause dramatically. It sounded half Captain Kirk and half Kermit the Frog. And then he would smile sadly and pat the person on the shoulder. Didn't they get it? Movies and dancing were fun. What else needed to be said? We were here to say no to fun. The Lord Jesus had died to set us free from sin, and we wanted to go around having fun? Really? To play dodgeball, a thinly veiled excuse for the thuggiest to humiliate the gentlest, Peter would have had to remove his glasses and play blind in front of the girls. He wasn't going to do this, so he sat it out on the stage of the gym where Mr. Shovel's funeral had been held, and resented not having anything better to do than nothing. His parents refused to allow him to wear his glasses to play, and he therefore refused to play.
There is a quite optimistic amount of time scheduled each year for all this talking, which time must be filled to the brim, and that by men with little or no public speaking, teaching, or studying credentials. It is commonplace for the actual content of the discussion, therefore, to get a bit thin. More importantly, we can hope that it gets extremely uninspired, dispirited, numbingly repetitive. The more it functions as an anesthetic, rather than being an aesthetic experience, the more pliable and open will grow the hearts and minds of the beneficiaries of our work. Exactly like at the dentist's. We need the God talk to be as toothless as an octogenarian with an abiding lifelong love of licorice. What we need, therefore, in order to do our best work, is a carrier wave of innocuous babble. Just any old rubbish that can float ponderously around the room so we have something to use. Then we can ensure that the audible, obvious clatter of trite empty words carries an unnoticed dark passenger. Like a coded message, like a virus, like a parasite, our own content can be appended to what is being said. And the more innocuous, tedious, repetitive, and mundane the carrier wave, the more audacious our added content can be without attracting any notice whatsoever. If done correctly, our human audience can afterward remember a fairly tedious, wandering lecture upon the 6th chapter of Romans, while actually we have grafted in quite invisibly and near seamlessly bizarre assumptions, arrogance, vanity, idolatry, elitism, slander, lies, and even arguments for the social punishment of anyone spiritually diverse, or for the oppression of the young, the weak, and the earnest. This strategy has consistently proven effective. Tedium used as a privacy fence against being discovered at our best work. With each passing decade, the modern human mind gets ever more dazzled and boggled by anything remaining tedious for more than a moment or two. We can cause any evil we'd like in the modern world quite unnoticed, so long as we ensure that we are boring enough while doing it.
He could record his own voice, or the voices of his little cousins, and dub in applause or a laugh track. They could do little skits. They could play some horrible rock music from the radio and record drumming they did on a kit made of suitcases and pots and pans, with wooden spoons and spatulas serving as drumsticks. They weren't admitting to liking radio pop and rock songs. They were mocking them, after all, but it sure was fun. Peter had a portable radio and tape deck called a Ghetto Blaster in the 80s, which had an interesting feature. It was cheaply made, so if you held the play button down partway, the tape could slip by too quickly, allowing you to speed up the playback of any tape you put in it. And you could dump this down to the KI decks to make people sound like chipmunks. You could even fool it to record things with the play button pressed down halfway, so the not speeded up playback would then make everyone and everything amusingly slowed down and low-pitched. Peter went around recording things, like television theme songs, mason jars full of crickets, ponds full of frogs, car engines revving, his father hammering on the underside of an old car and muttering, "Prick damn fart," or "Hokey liftin'," and any musical noisemakers he could find. And he read. Always he read. Comics were so garish, Peter's mother always said, because she knew words. What would they accomplish besides making Peter want to talk, dress, walk, and act like the people in this world? If Peter was reading comic books Saturday night, how would he be able to take any interest in church Sunday morning? What had Spider-Man to do with Jesus? How could our Lord compete with Batman? Men could talk in church services, and women could not. Men opened and shut windows, counted collection box money, and passed the bread and wine around. Women did not. Women prepared the food for fellowship dinners, and men did not. It was all very simple. Equal but different roles, Mr. Shovel always said. And when, like this world, we try to go outside the roles God has created in his ineffable wisdom, are we not bringing ruination upon ourselves and going against nature itself? Could we as Christians do that? I know that I could not. Could you do that? The men always vocally agreed with his rhetorical questions and nodded their heads solemnly and vigorously. The women were always silent about it. Everything was as it should be. He could spell things and didn't generally make grammar mistakes when he spoke. He liked to draw. He laughed at things that his father didn't think were funny, things with words. He also liked superheroes. It got worse and worse. "Peter, you've got to be very careful," his father told him, getting out pen and paper. "There's a line, see? On the one end of it are people who are very male. On the other end of it are people who are very female. Here's the middle. You're kind of in the middle, maybe a little to the feminine side. You know how Mr. Black's wife at church is kind of like a man, and how the Blacks have never had any children? You know how Mr. Periwinkle at church is actually a whole lot more like a woman than a man, and he still lives with his mother and is never married? He's not sure which washroom to go into, I swear. Be careful. Now, I don't want you to play with Jonathan LaRose after church, okay? Do you understand?" Peter did. He really did. "There was once a shepherd," Mr. Marshall began, "who had a sheep which wouldn't stop straying from the flock." Not from the shepherd, Peter noticed. It always insisted on its own way, on its own will. So the shepherd, in his wisdom, broke one of its legs so it couldn't stray any more, and he carried it around until it healed, and it never strayed again, Mr. Marshall explained. A heartwarming tale of the infinite patience and loving kindness of God with us, wayward sheep as we too often seem to be. So, if we feel pain in our lives, it's God loving us and keeping us from straying from the flock by crippling us. It was good to be crippled emotionally. It was proof that we were the people God loved, and it kept us with the flock. Peter couldn't help but feel that his pain wasn't coming from God at all, but from the flock and false shepherds in it, like the ones the Bible described as not sparing the flock. They wanted to do this loving leg-breaking to the minds of people like him. It had nothing to do with the shepherd, God, at all. It had to do with conformity and control. It had to do with power. It had to do with never thinking or saying or doing anything that took anyone by surprise or was off script. Peter's father said he'd seen the film Boy to Man at a staff meeting in case he ever taught health class. He said that so long as boys and girls weren't taught in the same room, and so long as Peter remembered that despite what the film said, masturbation was not normal, and so long as Peter referred to the class as family health and not you-know-what ed, that Peter could remain in the room while it was taught. Peter hadn't really understood the film properly. For one thing, he'd confused masturbation with menstruation, and had asked his father awkward questions about exactly how boys could even indulge in this unnatural body function at all. It sure didn't sound very normal for boys to menstruate, Peter was forced to agree, but how did they even do it? Could it happen to him by accident if he wasn't careful? Did Mr. Periwinkle menstruate? After that, Peter's father, mortified to have to explain any of this, had asked Peter to just go sit in the library while his class took family health. Peter did this and got many books read, and all the kids in his class believed he had no idea exactly what happened when a man liked a lady very much and lumpy things happened in his pants. But Peter read books, so of course he knew. On Star Trek, everyone would be standing around laughing over something, and Mr. Spock would not understand, because he was from a different culture and would miss the references. Everyone would enjoy something, but Mr. Spock would not be allowed by his culture to enjoy it. Or Mr. Spock would make a joke, but it would be so subtle that no one would laugh. Maybe Captain Kirk would say, "Spock, I see what you did there," but that was about it. Of course, Peter didn't know that Captain Kirk talked like that, because Peter had only read the books and had never heard the voices of any of the actors. Everyone else on the show could do whatever they wanted, but not Mr. Spock, because he was a Vulcan, and they didn't believe in fun and emotions, and were very religious. So Mr. Spock just watched, and knew everything, or annoyed people by mentioning things that were terribly obvious, but which you weren't supposed to talk about for social reasons. Or he went to his quarters and prayed, like Peter was supposed to do. Vulcans did not swear, sing, dance, or drink alcohol. They meditated in silence. Being a church kid was a lot like being a Vulcan.
I'm a red sweater. What could be better than to stay all nice and clean? I got this idea, it just suits me. I never leave the washing machine. There's blood and sweat, dry stains, you bet, and dirt and grease and food. I've never seen the world firsthand, but I'm told that it's very rude. When other clothes offend my nose in my Maytag so bright, I scream and shout and kick them out, which of course is only right. Yeah, I'll be faded and tattered, no one day too holy to mend up or darn. But when I'm bagged and tagged, I won't be a filthy rag, just a tangled twist of pinkish yarn. I'm a that sweater.
Shrill voices were often heard over the school PA saying, "Okay, listen up, ABHS. We're doing something really exciting next week, so pay attention or you'll miss out." It would always end up being something stupid that everyone was supposed to do together, that at most a third of the school would remember to do, like wearing cardigans for Cardigan Thursday, or wearing stripes for Stripes Monday. They were often going from classroom to classroom looking for small amounts of money for various things nobody much cared about. They did raffles for prizes nobody wanted. They were continually telling kids, "Don't miss out," on stuff no one could remember 2 minutes after they'd left. They'd ask people to do anonymous surveys students generally ended up drawing hairy, spurting genitalia upon. If students didn't participate, these people scolded said student with big, sad smiles and warned how much they were somehow spoiling it for everyone. Peter frequently didn't participate. He was quite content to miss out. Peter looked at the old scar, which was very faint and small. He flexed and bent the blade and wondered how hard it would be to die. The week before, his father, depressed on the couch, had turned around to face Peter and had snapped at him and told him to get to church, get to school, and generally straighten up and fly right. He demanded to know what was wrong with Peter. Peter had told him, once again, that Peter was depressed again. "What in the name of heck do you have to be depressed about?" his father had demanded. "Confound it, you've got everything you need. Food and clothing, a roof over your head. You want for nothing, and you cause nothing but trouble. You don't know anything about depression. I know about depression." It had been, Peter had realized, a depression fight. Depression dominance. Peter's father had been trying to out-mope Peter. "I'll just go up to my room and think about death then," Peter had announced, up for a challenge. "Death? Like you're going to kill yourself," Peter's father had tried to scoff, but with fear leaking into his voice. "Just watch me," Peter had responded. "Not if I don't beat you to it," his father had said quietly, and rolled over on the couch to put his back to the room again. So Peter spent some days in his room thinking about death and playing with the razor blade. Other people called Peter's church Plymouth Brethren due to its history. This didn't remove the confusion much, because each generation, every Plymouth Brethren worldwide group, was likely to have some kind of acrimonious spat, inevitably involving learned Christian men on two sides fighting, and having what George Carlin would have called a great big dick-waving prick fight over which group was demonstrating Christian unity correctly. After generations of these divisions, there were so many different unaffiliated branches of Plymouth Brethren groups which wouldn't speak to each other that no Brethren person could even keep track of them all. Attempts to diagram the history of it look like the root system of an enormous tree. So, we're charging just $40. It's going to be so good this year. $40? For what? Peter wanted to know, curious despite himself. $40 needed to buy a pretty good time in 1980s currency. Be at the Elgin Landing Hall at 6 o'clock sharp. We'll get on the bus we're renting and head up to Crotch Lake. We'll start with a prayer meeting, and then Mr. White will speak to us. I think he's talking about avoiding the air of this world that is all around us, because it was really good last year. Then a question and answer period, then a Bible study meeting, then lunch. Oh, can you bring pasta salad? Then what? Peter asked guardedly, not committing to ask his mother to make pasta salad. Then volleyball for the afternoon, with supper at 6, followed by board games, and then we hope to head to Mattawaka to sing hymns for the old folks at Embassy West Senior Living. I hope they're better medicated this month. They got pretty rowdy last time. When they hear those old favorites, $40 for 6 hours of volleyball, preaching, board games, and singing hymns to old people? Peter asked, purely for purposes of clarification. Yeah, it'll be so fun. Are you coming? Jen chirped. No, I don't think so, Peter said. Why not? Jen demanded to know, clearly miffed as Run WWJD continued to rap with deepest whiteboy earnest sincerity behind her voice. It's not really my thing. Peter was firm. He knew, of course, that not liking all the stuff that he was supposed to like was a problem. Well, if you'd come out to the planning meetings me and Sherry and Kelly had, you could have suggested something. If it sounded like fun, who knows? So long as it wouldn't have offended anyone. Thanks, but no, he said. Okay, but you're really missing out. Bye, Jen said, and hung up her pink princess phone with the DC Talk sticker. How's it going? Peter asked, wondering why Ken was calling him. Awesome. Hey, listen, Jesse's brother lent us his truck, and Trevor and Jesse and me have a couple of 2-4s here, eh? I know you don't drink, but we could get you a Pepsi or something. We're going to this club in Hull called the Wet Spot. Shit, man, you should see it. There's this one dancer, she's blonde with humongoid love bags on her, and she takes this ginormous cigar, right? And she blows smoke rings out of her... Got it, Mom! Peter quickly interrupted to get Mrs. Gray, who'd picked up the phone downstairs to make a call, off the line. Okay, Peter, she replied, hanging up the downstairs phone again. You're all 16 and Jesse's the only one with fake ID. How are you going to get in? Peter asked, purely for purposes of clarification. Hey, no problemo, man. Trevor's girlfriend's cousin is one of the bouncers. He'll let us in no problem and maybe get us free drinks and probably free lap dances and shit too, right? Anyway, are you coming? Ken sounded like he really had his heart set on introducing Peter to the wonders of the Wet Spot. No, I don't think so. Peter was firm. He knew, of course, that not liking what he was supposed to like was, as always, a problem. Why not? Ken demanded to know, clearly miffed, as Bobby McFerrin's Don't Worry, Be Happy continued to play in the background over the barely discernible sounds of glass bottles clinking and Jesse laughing because he'd farted again. You're not turning into a moe on us, are you, you butt pirate? Ken laughed uproariously at this display of wit. You know you're just going to get into a huge fight with a bunch of French guys and get kicked out of the place. Anyway, it's not really my kind of thing, Peter said. Not really your kind of thing? It's tits, for God's sake! You turning into a turd burglar? What exciting stuff do you have planned for tonight, fag? I was going to die, Peter did not, upon reflection, say. I was going to do some recording, he said, instead trailing off at the end, not sure if this was going to end up to be true or not. At home playing with your equipment, huh? Different strokes for different fags. Fag. Ciao, Ken chortled. Jesse hooted his approval. See you at school, Peter said, and hung up. It wouldn't be until 6 years later that Jesse would finally come out of the closet and marry an interior decorator. The church had phoned, this world had phoned, and Peter was saying no to both in favor of staying in his room like a soul in limbo armed with an old razor blade. They're both trying to include him, and he didn't, he couldn't, fit in.
Another of his aunts is there also, the one who thinks he's not nice. There's something wrong with her eyes, he thinks. She is not quite close enough to see what exactly. The young man goes under the blood-warm water. There seems to be some grit in it. He surfaces, and for a moment he looks up at the lifeguard in the tower. It is his cousin, kind of. But it has black orbs of delicious hate for eyes, and it is looking directly into his stinging eyes, with a look that is wholly judgmental, and wholly horrified, and profoundly shocked. The mouth is a perfectly round hole. Delightful. And it isn't even remotely human. It is leaning down at him, and its face fills up his vision entirely. The mouth is open and round, and it points at him, the black orbs of horror and hatred seeming to be giving off black acidic steam as it does.
The abrupt, brusque, middle-aged nurse took down Peter's vital statistics. Finally she said, "So what are you doing here to see Dr. Kahn?" "I get depressed sometimes," Peter told her, feeling quite self-conscious. "Huh! I thought that only happened to women," she said. "You know, at certain times of the month." She scribbled furiously on her clipboard. "You aren't actually a very good nurse, are you?" Peter thought, and did not say. Dr. Kahn didn't want to listen to Peter, and simply presented the idea that it was a sort of a thing where, with the good church Peter went to and the good family he came from, if he was sad, then that was a sort of a thing where there was a sort of a pill for it. Peter said he wouldn't take any pills. Dr. Kahn didn't press him. This just made her more and more feminist. That was what she called it, anyway. She made them all read Margaret Lawrence's The Stone Angel, for which English teachers is reserved a special place in hell, Peter fervently believed. The climax of the novel was achieved when the old woman it was about took a gravelly crap in the woods. Being asked to read it, and listen to Mrs. Toby lecture fondly about its brilliant symbols and imagery, made Peter feel rather like Mrs. Toby was doing the same thing to her class that Hagar Shipley had done to the forest floor. Peter sold portable TVs and European voltage converters. He sold all kinds of cordless phone and hearing aid batteries. He once sold a replacement printer cartridge to a massive transvestite wearing a hot pink blazer and skirt, a blonde bob wig, false pink nails, and the largest pair of pink suede thigh-high boots one could imagine having ever seen factory manufacture. She had huge red hands with blonde stubble on the backs of them, and spoke entirely in falsetto. She was the size and shape of a refrigerator, and wore a bracing amount of very floral perfume. Peter felt it was a major victory to have not laughed even once while explaining how to install the replacement printer cartridge. It was very like a Monty Python routine. Ahmad would never preface his little stories, so it would seem terribly surreal when he'd burst in and start talking before they'd quite noticed he'd arrive. I was running and running and running and running and jumping, and then I ate this mushroom, and then I touched a star, and I was shooting and shooting and shooting, and then I got raccoon ears and a tail, and I could fly, and I flew and flew and flew, but then I died, the young boy would crow, wide-eyed. Yep, I remember seeing shit like that when I used to eat mushrooms. Drugs are bad, kid, just say no, remember that. Reed would respond, all mock seriousness.
Story is told of old Mr. McMurdy meeting a young brother who'd been sitting on a park bench reading what he thought of as a Christian book one afternoon. What have you been enjoying, Mr. McMurdy asked the young man. Mr. McMurdy was, as those who had the chance to meet him may remember, very fond of being a loving encouragement to all of us young people during the Great Depression. I just found something new in Romans. This new young writer has so many good things to say about it, the young man told him. He'd not long been a child of God, wasn't raised in the church, but seemed to be seeking to please the Lord nonetheless. Well, Mr. McMurdy told him, mud puddles certainly contain water, but why would someone choose to drink from one? Surely this should be an exercise for all of us, especially in these dark, dark times when Satan is so active looking to devour us. There is much that is new, creeping in among us, from the churches around us, and we need to seek to hold fast to those old landmarks lest we all founder and shipwreck.
People started to call them the Troubles. They would say, it does no good to focus on the Troubles. And they would smile, the way mothers who have lost their child do, with fear behind their eyes. Some people were wanting to read aloud at church from a modern translation of the Bible, and some people were praying with you and your instead of thee and thou, and not even attempting the archaic verb tenses thought to be the only reverent way in which one didst address the Almighty. Hast thou no idea what year it be? Some wanted to ask them. Hast thou seen nary a calendar when thou didst come, yea, even unto this place this morn? Verily, marry and sooth, sirs, this all seemeth passing strange unto us. Peter was not one of those modern folk, and thought you and your sounded terribly weird, even if you did say them with the capitals. There was no place for thinking. There was no support for it, no community of it. Inquiry was troubling. Doubting and questioning were the opposite of what Christians were to do. Christians were to believe. Ridiculous, absurd things. Nasty, horrible things. Hateful things. Arrogant things. Whatever anyone at the church made up off the top of their heads. No matter what the Bible or centuries of other Christians had written. The Bible said that faith was like prescience, was about discerning what was coming next and getting ready for it. In Peter's church, though, faith was thought of as trying to change the world through blindly wishing hard. Peter often wondered if the men who spoke about the Bible knew the kinds of dark and horrible things that were in there. Blood and whoredoms, foreskins and dung, breasts, buttocks, and wombs, men who spilled their seed upon the ground while they knew their dead brothers' wives, shaved sex slaves, girls cut into pieces, copulating couples getting pinned to the desert floor by a javelin thrust into the tent where they were busy knowing one another, dogs eating the corpses of queens who'd been thrown to their deaths but leaving the palms of the hands in the street, rape, whores washing themselves out after work in the city fountain at Samaria, though it was polluted with the blood of a king. All the things that were bad to talk or think about. The things that were in this world and on television and in movies. When men spoke about the Bible at church, it was pretty much all nice stuff, unless they were talking about hell, which was the only nasty stuff they'd mention. Then, they'd mostly make up stuff because the Bible actually has comparatively very little in it about hell. Certainly not enough to keep these men going for an hour on it anyway. Sometimes at 3 or 4 in the morning before an 8 o'clock class when an essay was due or something had to be read, Peter would hear Benny singing particularly loudly. Often it was Rick Astley. Benny rickrolled Peter over and over, getting all of the words wrong. But one night, it was Celine Dion, Where Does My Heart Beat Now? And Benny was singing loudly in no particular key or rhythm.
How does my heart beat now?
He was into it. He was also shouting loud diatribes against the President of the United States of America. He was shouting as if the President was standing in Benny's room, listening humbly as Benny rained abuse down on him and his policies.
President George H.W. Bush, you are the worst president. The shit president, the bad president.
Benny shouted.
You dropped the bombs, you caused the war, you are the stupid.
Several times that night, Peter went and banged on Benny's door after midnight, harder each time, before Benny showed any sign of hearing the banging. Benny would stop dead each time, the music abruptly silenced, and after a dramatic pause, would say in a very formal-sounding, suddenly quiet and mannerly voice,
Yes, what is it? Hello?
Peter would tell him it was too noisy, and Benny would call out,
Oh, so sorry. I like you, Peter. You are great. You are a good man. I'm terribly, terribly sorry. You are a good man. I like you, Peter.
But it would always start again. Peter tried some modern churches and found them impossible to take seriously. No one took Bibles to church with them. They wouldn't be needing them there. No one took hymn books. They wouldn't be needing those either. Beth went with him once to a church service in a modern-style church with a rock band worship team. She ran out in tears, suffering church flashbacks that tore her up inside and were part of the nervous breakdown she was spiraling into. For his own part, Peter had to avoid laughing nastily at the modern church rather than crying. It was so Disney Channel, he couldn't worship there. There weren't 2 seconds of peace and quiet in which to interact with God at all.
Well, get your church shoes on, maybe grab your Bible too. Our church is gonna move ya. Take a pew, look around. Communion wafers move you when you pop them in your mouth. Pastor Bob is gonna move ya. So full of love, he gets right to ya. Pastor Bob is gonna move ya. Worship team has got piercings and tattoos to cool while praising Jesus. PowerPoint, a huge PA. Our team is gonna move you when they sing about the Lord. Worship team is gonna move you. Sing about Jesus, the disciples too, yeah. The church is gonna move you. Well, I'm here today. What can I say? You made a way. What can I say? You turned the night into the day. What can I say? To you, my God. Come on, sing with me, everybody. What can I say? Come on, what can I say? Everybody, come on. What can I say?
The distant hills continued to reverberate with gunfire. Rifles, shotguns, and pistols could all be heard coming from all directions. Drunken cheering and whooping continued. AA meetings could come later. Someone began firing off a high-caliber semi-automatic rifle as quickly as possible. A burst of more than 10 shots. A second semi-automatic called out to the first from a different hillside. Almost 20 shots. It was New Year's Eve in America.
Maybe someday I'll gaze on heaven, but now my life is cold and empty. I'm all alone.